Joseph has experienced yet another catastrophe as we pick up the story in Genesis 40. He has been falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and put into the king's prison. We do not know exactly what kind of prison it was. The text calls it variously a house and a pit. All we know is it was a prison. And we know that Joseph, like in every other situation, ends up taking it over and running it. It won't be that long before he's running Egypt. Sometime after this, we do not know how long, from his imprisonment to the beginning of chapter 40. All we know is that the text makes clear 2 years from this point, Joseph will be 30 years old. I have examined carefully Joseph's age in all of this because I think it is so important. The major catastrophes of his life occurred between the ages of 17 and 30. Today we talk as though young men in their 20s don't really need to grow up. But that's not how God sees it. He expects godly behavior from the young men when they are children, when they are teenagers, and when they are young adults. God expects young men to live fully productive lives and not take the decade off in foolish, irresponsible behavior. Joseph faced the greatest crisis in his life in his teens and 20s and emerged from them prepared to become a world historical figure. God expects the same from young men today. Joseph had been in prison a number of years when two of Pharaoh's servants get into trouble with Pharaoh and are thrown into the prison Joseph is running, where it says they remain for a while. They are there long enough for Joseph to get to know them, and that's important. It was the kind of prison where the inmates could interact. It was the exact kind of prison God wanted it to be, and Joseph is there at exactly the right time. Are you in difficult circumstances right now? They are the exact circumstances God has designed. I'm not saying you should not change your circumstances if you have the opportunity, but many of you are in circumstances you cannot change or should not change. Trust God to use every situation you are in for His purposes. A cupbearer is one of the king's most intimate officials. One of his duties was that of a food taster. He would eat from the king's plate and drink from his cup to make sure they had not been poisoned. The cupbearer and the baker have dreams, and they were visibly disturbed by what they dreamt. When Joseph sees them the next morning, he can see they are really bothered by something. "Why are your faces downcast?" he asks. He had to know them pretty well by this time to know they were downcast. He shows concern for their well-being. They tell him, "We have dreams, and there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph says something that reveals the kind of man he is. He says interpretations belong to God. First, he gives God the glory for being God. Everything ultimately comes from him, including dream interpretation. Secondly, it is clear Joseph is still trusting God in spite of everything that has happened. As I read this, I wondered, why is Joseph still confident in dreams? The dreams he had as a teenager had not been fulfilled. He must have strongly believed, even at this stage, that the dreams he had were from God and would still be fulfilled by God, although you would think he would have doubts. But this statement indicates he did not doubt the promises of God. Do not doubt God's promises no matter what the circumstances. The cupbearer tells Joseph his dream of placing a cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph's interpretation, in 3 days you will be restored to your position. Then he asks the cupbearer to remember him. He doesn't ask the cupbearer to raise him up to Pharaoh's house. That must not have occurred to him. He only asks him to get him out of the pit he's in. And the cupbearer will, but it will be a while. In verse 15, we have Joseph's first commentary on all that has happened to him. He said he was stolen from his homeland, as some translations say kidnapped, but he does not mention his brothers specifically. Then he says he has ended up in this pit. Even though he is innocent, Joseph is human. He knows he has been unjustly treated. The baker is encouraged by this interpretation and asks Joseph to interpret his dream, but it is not what he wants to hear. Joseph says in 3 days, Pharaoh was going to execute him. Unlike the 400 prophets of 1 Kings 22, Joseph does not tell the baker what he wants to hear. He doesn't lie to him. He tells him a very unpalatable truth. Now, it would have been easy to get away with a lie. In 3 days, the baker would have been dead anyway, but Joseph dealt only in truth. And sure enough, Joseph's interpretations were spot on. The cupbearer was restored and the baker executed. Again, sadly, the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph for the time being. For Joseph, another bitter disappointment, but it wasn't permanent. It would last 2 years, but it would come to an end. How many of us are in that 2-year window in our lives right now? We have served the Lord faithfully, and we await the fruit of our obedience. That fruit is not long in coming.